What would work instead for a developing country under fiscal constraints is the opposite of that, i.e., first of all, taking the view that for public infrastructure to deliver public benefits for a national economy, for a society as a whole, you need a public sector to be in charge of that is responsible and accountable to the population. Private companies can't do that. Private companies are accountable to their shareholders, their owners, etc. This is not an ethical point. This is simple economic fact. Governments can and should. They don't always, but they absolutely should and should be made to by democratic pressures. Operate accountably to their citizens. That's the point of public sector, and of course that's why strong public sectors were developed both in the North and, following independence, in developing countries in the global South. And it's why in these key infrastructure sectors, countries typically developed state-owned water companies, energy companies, and constructed roads, ports, airports, etc. And so this, I think, is the direction to go as a way of constructing infrastructure that will not only, as it were, get constructed, but to do it in a way that is best value and accountable and most reliable and under the control of people and the democratic structures of the country. Fiscal constraints still, nevertheless, might be seen to make that possible. And I think one thing that needs to be done globally is for the if you like, the economic logic, the economic model behind the fiscal constraints to be challenged. It's been shown to not have good economic consequences as a whole. But even within fiscal constraints, the fiscal constraints are in terms of limiting government borrowing. There is still scope for domestic financing of infrastructure development by increasing taxation. And there is considerable scope for increasing taxation. Quite remarkably, the IMF a few years ago published a paper summarising its own estimates as to how much extra taxation could be raised around the world by more serious taxation policies. And its estimates for the global south was that by introducing more wealth tax, more property tax, more tax on profit, tax revenues could be increased by as much as 30% or more, which is very substantial. So tax revenues themselves can be used. Excuse me. And if you have a public utility running services like water or energy or public transport, one thing you can do is structure the charges so as to provide cross-subsidies from rich to poor. And so, again, both with water and energy, for example, historically, what most countries in the North did was to charge people on a similar basis to local government taxes. So people connected to water and energy networks were paying something that related to the value of their property. So the wealthier you were, the more you paid. And then on top of that, some charge for the volume of water and electricity you consume. That also reflected correctly the economics of those sectors. The capital cost is much higher than the operating cost. So that's fine. And so if you have, again, public utilities, you can organise the charges for that in such a way that they work through cross-subsidy as a form of internal tax. And this historically has been done. This is how South Africa, for example, drove rural electrification following the ending of apartheid. They simply started charging rich people who were already connected to the electricity network more in order to finance the cost of extending it to the poor.